The play opens in the middle of the night in Venice, in the street outside Brabantio's house. Enter Roderigo and Iago. It begins in the middle of the action, or in medius res, as we come in on the pair of them in the course of an argument. Shakespeare successfully uses this technique to create mystery from the very beginning, as we don't explicitly find out what they are arguing about until more than 100 lines into the scene. What we do learn from the first 3 lines is that this is not an alliance of pure friendship, as there appears to be a transactional element in play here. Roderigo is clearly outraged that Iago has been sitting on some information that he, Roderigo, feels it within his rights to know, especially as Iago has been spending Roderigo's money as if it were his own. Tush, never tell me. I take it much unkindly that thou, Iago, who hast had my purse as if the strings were thine, shouldst know of this. Iago, just as hotly, denies the charges that Roderigo is laying at his feet, complaining that Roderigo has not been listening to a word he's been saying. Sblood, but you will not hear me. If ever I did dream of such a matter, abhor me. Roderigo responds, Thou toldst me thou didst hold him in thy hate. Note the use of the pronoun him here to refer to who we will later find out to be Othello. In starting the scene in medius res, it is of course totally natural that pronouns be used to refer back to a person who has already been explicitly named earlier on in the part of the conversation which we have not heard. Shakespeare, however, successfully exploits this convention to characterise Othello as other right from the start, as he is in fact not named at all in the first scene. Not only do Roderigo and Iago use pronouns, i.e. he and him, but they will also go on to use racial epithets to insult and dehumanise him in order to create an image of an outsider whose only identity is the one imposed on him by others. In a lengthy speech, Iago reassures Roderigo that he does indeed hate him and gives his reasons why. Iago's nose is out of joint because he feels that Othello has deliberately snubbed him over a promotion. Iago had lined up 3 great ones of the city who had gone to Othello, cap in hand in a sign of respect, in personal suit to make me his lieutenant. But the arguments made by these eminent gentlemen fell on deaf ears, as Othello, who he accuses of loving his own pride and purposes, fobbed them off with a bombast circumstance that was horribly stuffed with epithets of war, or with some fancy reason that was overflowing with military jargon. Not only has Iago missed out on the promotion he feels he is owed, but he is also full of contempt and fuming that he has been passed over for someone who is, in his opinion, his inferior. A great arithmetician, one Michael Cassio, a Florentine, that never set a squadron in the field, nor the division of a battle knows more than a spinster, unless the bookish Theoric, wherein the togaed consuls can propose as masterly as he. He complains that Cassio has no experience on the battlefield, and his knowledge of strategic military planning is less than that of an old woman who spends her day spinning wool, save for what he has picked up from textbooks, which even then only puts him on a par with government officials. In contrast, he, Iago, of whose own military credentials Othello's eyes had seen the proof at Rhodes, at Cyprus, and on other grounds, Christian and heathen, must be lead and calmed, or held back from advancement like a sailing boat in calm water, by someone he dismisses as a mere accountant. His jealousy that Cassio must his lieutenant be, and I, God bless the mark, his moorship's ancient, or standard-bearer, is clear. Note how he disdainfully coins the racial epithet, his moorship, to sound like the title of his lordship, not only because he cannot bear to refer to him by his given name, but also to hint that due to his race, the word Moor is used to denote people of North African heritage, Othello puts on airs and graces and thinks he is better than he should be. Iago will show himself to be obsessed with Othello's colour throughout. Roderigo's sympathetic interjection, "By heaven, I would rather have been his hangman," only momentarily stops the flow of Iago's tirade as he goes on to moan that it's who you know rather than what you know and the time you've served, that 'tis the curse of service, where preferment goes by letter and affection, not by the old gradation where each second stood heir to the first. Roderigo's comment that he should no longer remain in his service if that is how he feels leads Iago to reveal to him and to us his motivation for sticking it out. I follow him to serve my turn upon him. In other words, Iago is only pretending to serve Othello so that he can get close enough to get his revenge. He says that there are two types of servant: those who are duteous and knee-crooking, who spend their lives loyally bowing and scraping and grovelling in return for little more than their provender or their food, until such a time as they are cashiered or got rid of because they are too old. He has nothing but contempt for such a servant. Whip me such honest knaves, he declares. His use of the oxymoron honest knaves here demonstrates to the audience right from the start that his moral compass is not like ours, as he equates honesty with roguish behaviour. The other type of servants are those who are trimmed in forms and visages of duty, or who, in other words, show all the outward signs of loyalty, while keeping yet their hearts attending on themselves, until they have lined their coats, or profited from their deception. These fellows, he declares, have some soul, and such a one do I profess myself. Indeed, in following him I follow but myself. Heaven is my judge, not I for love and duty, but seeming so for my peculiar end. In other words, he has his own personal and private reasons for appearing to be loyal to his master, and they do not spring from any misplaced sense of love or duty. He ends this lengthy speech with the paradoxical, "I am not what I am," to suggest that we should not take him at face value. It's a shame that Roderigo is too naive to take heed. As we can see, Shakespeare achieves a lot with this initial exchange between Iago and Roderigo. Not only does it sow the seeds of the plot and set up the themes of deception and jealousy that will run throughout the play, but it also establishes Iago very firmly as the play's antagonist, or the chief enemy of our protagonist or tragic hero Othello, and showcases his villainous capabilities. Roderigo is under the impression that they are accomplices, although that implies joint enterprise, and Iago, as we will find out, is very much a lone wolf. But he is merely a patsy, and so Iago is able to make him his stooge and fall guy with ease. This effortless manipulation of the rich and gullible Roderigo is just a foretaste of how he will deceive and exploit, not just Othello, but every character whose path he crosses, and establishes the dramatic irony which will be a feature throughout the play. Note how Roderigo also uses a racial epithet, thick lips, to insult Othello, as he remarks that if he can carry it thus, or carry it off, what we will find out in due course is his secret marriage to Desdemona, he will have very good luck indeed. Iago now eggs Roderigo on to make mischief by calling up or waking her father Brabantio, in order to poison Othello's delight by proclaiming him or denouncing him in the street, with the goal of incensing her kinsman or family, so that Othello's current happiness may lose some colour. Roderigo needs little encouragement and duly begins to shout up at his window. Iago joins in, Awake, what ho, Brabantio! Thieves, thieves, look to your house, your daughter, and your bags! Thieves, thieves! Note how Iago lists his daughter along with Brabantio's other property, such as his house and his bags of money. In Shakespeare's time, women were the property of their fathers until they married, when they became the property of their husbands. Brabantio appears above at a window, presumably in his nightgown. Iago calls up to him, informing him that he has been robbed, all the while making sure that he remains in the shadows so that he cannot be identified. Note how he uses blasphemous language in the form of a minced oath, zounds, short for God's wounds, and exploits the language of sheep farming to further dehumanize Othello as he describes him, using a metaphor, as an old black ram who is tupping your white ewe. He seems to revel in the vulgarity and bestiality of this description, which is designed to shock and revolt what we will soon find out to be the vain and pompous Brabantio. The verb tupping is the word specifically used for the mating of two sheep, and he makes sure that he emphasises not only the difference in their ages with the adjective old, but also the difference in their race with the contrast between black and white. He goes even further by maliciously suggesting that if Brabantio is not quick to stop them, the devil will make a grandsire of you, or that the devil, in the form of Othello, will get Desdemona pregnant and make a grandfather of him. Brabantio reveals that he has not even the whiff of a suspicion of what has been going on, as all Iago's cryptic comments have done is to confuse him. What? Have you lost your wits? Roderigo decides to step in, and he identifies himself to Brabantio. Brabantio's immediate disdain for him is apparent, and we start to see why Roderigo has involved himself in this matter. The worse are welcome. I have charged thee not to haunt about my doors. In honest plainness thou hast heard me say my daughter is not for thee. And he goes on to accuse Roderigo of coming to make mischief after a night out drinking. It seems that Roderigo has been after Desdemona's hand in marriage himself with little success, and that he's been paying Iago, seemingly through the nose and with little return on his investment, who has been only too happy to string him along for his help in achieving this. The two go back and forth, with Roderigo trying to make Brabantio understand what has happened, but Brabantio has no time for him, and shows this by not listening and interrupting him. Iago's impatience and frustration that his plan could be derailed is evident as he decides to step back in with even more blasphemous and vulgar language to get the plan back on track, as he appeals to Brabantio's own fears and prejudices. Note how he switches from blank verse to prose, the language of characters from the lower social classes, to emphasise the baseness of what he is saying, as he once more dehumanises Othello by making him out to be an animal who indulges in bestial behaviour just because of his race. Zounds, sir, you are one of those that will not serve God if the devil bids you. Because we come to do you service and you think we are ruffians, you'll have your daughter covered with a Barbary horse. You'll have your nephews neigh to you. You'll have coursers for cousins and jennets for Germans. A Barbary horse was a stallion from the north coast of Africa. Coursers were racehorses and jennets were small Spanish horses, while cousins is meant in the wider sense of family, and Germans is another word for blood relations. In other words, he complains that just because Brabantio doesn't like them, he will refuse to take their good advice, preferring instead that his daughter be mounted by a horse, with the added consequence that he will then have a family populated by all manner of different kinds of horses. Note how he alliterates nephews neigh, coursers for cousins and jennets for Germans, in order to emphasise the link between them. This playing with sound also suggests that Iago is taking an enormous amount of pleasure at speaking in such a base manner. Iago finally has Brabantio's attention as he exclaims, "What profane or foul-mouthed wretch art thou?" Iago responds using yet another base and vulgar metaphor. "I am one, sir, that comes to tell you your daughter and the Moor are now making the beast with two backs." Brabantio is outraged that his daughter should be spoken of in such a manner. "Thou art a villain." Note how Iago has skillfully managed to do most of the talking, yet it is Roderigo, the only one of the two to identify himself, at whom Brabantio's anger is aimed, as he tells him that he shall pay for this despicable rudeness. "This thou shalt answer. I know thee, Roderigo." Brabantio's contempt for Roderigo is clear, as he addresses him with the insultingly familiar thou, rather than the polite you. We now finally find out exactly what has happened, as Roderigo fills Brabantio in. That some time just after midnight, your fair daughter was transported with no worse nor better guard, but with a knave of common hire, a gondolier, to the gross clasps of a lascivious Moor. Note how once again Othello and Desdemona's relationship is constructed in purely racial and sexual terms. The phrase gross clasps evoking what he imagines to be his animalistic grasping and groping of her, while the phrase lascivious Moor suggests that having an excessive or offensive sexual desire is an innate characteristic of those of North African descent. If, however, this is not true, Roderigo concedes, "We then have done you bold and saucy wrongs, but if you know not this, my manners tell me, we have your wrong rebuke." He assures Brabantio that he would not play and trifle with the respect that is due him. He reiterates, "Your daughter, if you have not given her leave, I say again, hath made a gross revolt, tying her duty, beauty, wit, and fortunes in an extravagant and wheeling stranger of here and everywhere." The language Roderigo uses to describe Othello here, the adjectives extravagant in Shakespeare's time meaning unusual or unsuitable, and wheeling suggesting someone who is flighty, impetuous, and irresponsible, cast Othello as an outsider who is not to be trusted. Brabantio exits to discover if what Roderigo is telling him is true. Iago takes advantage of this to sidle away from any chance of discovery, arguing to Roderigo that it seems not meet or wholesome to my place to be produced, as if I stay I shall, against the Moor. In other words, it would not be good for his job if he were to be discovered, as he would be forced to be a witness against Othello. After all, he says, this business, although it will cause him a bit of bother, is not enough for him to be disgraced and lose his position, because he's about to leave to fight in the Cyprus wars, and he is indispensable because another of his fathom or ability they have none to lead their business. So even though I do hate him as I do hell's pains, yet, for necessity of present life, I must show out a flag and sign of love, which is indeed but sign. He takes his leave of Roderigo, telling him to send the search party to the Sagittarius Inn, where Othello and Desdemona have taken lodgings, and there will I be with him. Iago exits just in time, as Brabantio enters still in his nightgown, accompanied by servants with torches. He has discovered that Desdemona is indeed gone, and he has now, in what can only be described as the height of hypocrisy, completely changed his tune. His confusion is evident in the way his speech consists of questions, both direct and rhetorical, and exclamations. "Now, Roderigo, where didst thou see her? O unhappy girl! With the Moor, say'st thou? Who would be a father? How didst thou know 'twas she? Oh, she deceives me past thought. What did she say to you?" Absolutely devastated that Desdemona has committed a treason of the blood, or has betrayed her family, He is now much more conciliatory with Roderigo. The thou form with which he addresses him is now meant affectionately rather than condescendingly, and he even goes as far as to wish, hypocrite that he is, that Roderigo, to whom 5 minutes ago he wouldn't have given house room, had had her instead. They exit with Brabantio assuring good Roderigo that he'll deserve his pains, or make sure that he is well rewarded. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques, and English literature texts.